Ah yes, another human enters my cave voluntarily. This is new. Usually there's screaming involved. But go on, sit comfortably. Welcome, mortals, to another installment of my ancient musings. Tonight we delve into a mystery that has puzzled your short-lived kind for centuries. A tale whispered amongst the crumbling stones of a once mighty civilization that thought it was the center of the universe. Sound familiar? I speak, of course, of the Maya. Perhaps you have heard of them, or you've seen those perpetually confused tourists wandering around the Maya's ancient ruins today, squinting at hieroglyphs they'll never understand, while desperately searching for a bar of 5G signal. Now, gather round, humans, and prepare yourselves. Adjust your memory foam pillows, and make sure your weighted blankets are positioned just right. Because tonight, we're going to uncover why the Maya, a civilization so advanced they practically invented complex calendars just to tell you when it was a good day to sacrifice a turkey, simply vanished. Poof, like my last hoard of gold after a particularly ravenous dwarven raid. But fear not, for I, an ancient and incredibly wise dragon, who may or may not have napped through a few of these events myself, will illuminate the shadows of history for you. You see, unlike your current existence of instant gratification, Uber Eats, and climate-controlled living, where you complain if the room is 2 degrees too warm, the Maya lived in a world where a bad harvest meant, well, extinction. No DoorDash delivering a late-night burrito when the corn crop failed. No Netflix to distract you from the looming famine. Just hunger and a distinct lack of sourdough starters. Before we begin, a small favor for an old dragon. If you've enjoyed resting here beneath my wings, consider subscribing to my horde of stories. Each new believer helps me gather more treasures and avoid ravaging cities for loot when I'm low on funds. I'm retired now, and my back makes sounds that haunt even me. Part 1. The Golden Age and the Seeds of Decline. Ah, the classic Maya period. A truly magnificent era, from roughly 250 to 900 CE. Imagine cities like Tikal, Palenque, and Copan, sprawling metropolises carved from the very heart of the jungle. Imagine magnificent pyramids piercing the canopy like jagged teeth, adorned with intricate carvings and painted in vibrant blood reds and deep blues that would make even your most flamboyant TikTok influencers filter look like a grayscale daguerreotype. They were astronomers, these Maya. They mapped the heavens with a precision that would put your quaint little NASA to shame. They developed a writing system more complex than your latest tax forms. And trust me, I've seen your 1040s. They're adorable. They even mastered a mathematical system that included the concept of zero. A concept that, frankly, some of your modern politicians still seem to struggle with when they look at a budget. They were artists, scribes, and engineers. They built vast reservoirs to capture rainwater, intricate irrigation systems, and ball courts where they played pits. Now, let's talk about that game. You humans lose your minds over a missed penalty kick in the World Cup. In the Maya world, the stakes were a bit higher. If you lost, you didn't just get a sad interview and a lower salary. You often got your head removed. And yet, you mortals complain about losing at fantasy football. Imagine the stress of a must-win game, when the alternative is literally becoming a trophy. But even in their glory, the seeds of their downfall were being sown, like a tiny crack in a priceless sapphire, barely noticeable at first, but destined to shatter the whole thing. The Maya were, for all their brilliance, still utterly dependent on their environment. Their fertile lands and their precious water were their lifeblood. And when those began to falter, everything else came down like a house of cards. Think about it, humans. You fret about your carbon footprint, your rising sea levels, and your existential dread over whether to compost your avocado pits or not. The Maya had similar problems, but on a much more immediate and brutal scale. Their actions, their very way of life, slowly began to gnaw at the foundations of their existence. It's almost as if they were too good at being human. They grew too fast, built too high, and ate too much, never stopping to ask the jungle if it could keep up. Part 2. The environmental tightrope and the corn obsession. Now, let's talk about the jungle, my dear mortals. To you, it's a vacation destination or a backdrop for a Survivor episode. To the Maya, it was a grocery store, a hardware shop, and a fickle god all rolled into one. Lush, vibrant, teeming with life, and surprisingly fragile. In their fervent desire to feed an ever-growing population, the Maya started clearing vast swathes of this jungle. For what, you ask? To plant more corn, of course. Corn, corn, and more corn. It was their kale, their avocado toast, their everything bagel. They didn't just eat it, they believed they were made of it. According to their creation myths, the gods tried making humans out of mud, too floppy, and wood, no soul, before finally settling on yellow and white corn. So, when I say they were obsessed with maize, I mean they literally thought their DNA was basically popcorn. But here's the rub. That dense jungle canopy. It's not just there to look pretty in your travel brochures. It acts as a natural sponge. It holds moisture, prevents erosion, and generally keeps the ecosystem from turning into a dust bowl. When you hack it all down to make room for more cornfields, and to fuel the massive kilns needed to make lime plaster for your fancy pyramids, you're essentially inviting disaster to tea. And the Maya, bless their ambitious little hearts, invited disaster to a full-blown banquet. Without the trees, the rain, when it did come, didn't soak into the ground. It just washed away the exposed topsoil, carrying it into their precious reservoirs and silting them up. Imagine trying to get a decent drink of water from a muddy puddle that tastes like wet dirt and despair. And you're getting close. And during the dry season, well, let's just say thirsty doesn't quite cover it. You humans panic when the local Starbucks runs out of oat milk. The Maya had to watch their massive stone cisterns slowly dry up until the bottom was nothing but cracked mud and dead frogs. No fancy water filtration systems. No emergency bottled water deliveries from the Red Cross. Just parched throats, and the terrifying realization that the gods weren't answering their texts. There's evidence of prolonged, severe droughts during the crucial period of their decline. Droughts that lasted for decades. Imagine trying to maintain a complex society with elaborate rituals and a thriving intellectual class when everyone is just trying not to die of thirst. It's like trying to host a TED Talk during a zombie apocalypse. Priorities shift, wouldn't you agree? Part 3. The scramble for resources and the reality of luxury. As the environment grew more hostile, so did the Mayas' relationships with each other. Remember those magnificent cities I mentioned? They weren't exactly a peaceful, united nations of the rainforest. Think of it like a particularly vicious game of Thrones, but with more cacao beans and fewer dragons. Sadly for them, I was busy napping in a cave a few 100 miles away. Each city-state was effectively its own kingdom, vying for power, prestige, and, most importantly, the few remaining resources. When times were good, the competition might have been healthy, building the tallest pyramid to flex on the neighbors. But when the crops started failing, and the water became scarce, that competition turned deadly. Archaeological evidence points to an increase in warfare during this period. Fortifications grew more elaborate. Carvings depict more battles, more captives being dragged by their hair, and more, well, let's just say the Maya became very creative with how they displayed human remains. It's almost as if people get a bit cranky when they're hungry and desperate. Who knew? Now, let's contrast their luxury with yours, mortals. You think you're roughing it if your hotel room doesn't have a mini-fridge? Let me tell you about Maya luxury. Even the kings lived in a world of filth by your standards. In the great cities there was no sewage system, no porcelain thrones that whisk your waste away to some invisible elsewhere. In the densely packed urban centers, people lived on top of each other. Waste was often just tossed out of the house or into designated middens that were essentially giant, festering piles of trash and excrement right next to where people ate. Can you smell it? The humid jungle heat, the rotting corn husks, the gifts of 10,000 humans stewing in the sun. You walk down a clean paved street today and complain about a single piece of litter. A Maya citizen walked through a city that smelled like a medieval landfill during a heat wave. And when the rains finally did come, all that filth didn't just disappear. It washed into the same ground soil they used for farming. Disease was a constant, uninvited guest at every feast. Small wonder they were so obsessed with bloodletting. They probably thought it was the only way to get the bad air out of their systems. These wars weren't just about territory. They were about capturing people for sacrifice. The Maya believed that the sun wouldn't rise and the rain wouldn't fall unless they fed the gods. And the gods had a very specific diet, human blood, specifically royal blood. It was a desperate measure. But when your entire civilization is teetering on the brink of a multi-decade drought, you try anything, right? Even if it involves a very sharp obsidian blade and a willing, or not so willing, volunteer. Part 4. The Burden of Kings and the Failure of Magic. The Maya had a hierarchical society that would make a Victorian aristocrat weep with envy. At the top were the Kuhul Ajar, the Holy Lords. These kings weren't just political leaders, they were living gods, intermediaries between the mortal world and the terrifying supernatural realm of Xibalba. They were the ones who could communicate with the jaguar gods, ensure the prosperity of their people, and generally keep the cosmic balance in check. No pressure, right? If the rain fell and the corn grew, the king was a genius, a saint, a literal god on earth. They got to wear the biggest jade jewelry, the most ridiculous feather headdresses, and sleep on the softest mats. But what happens, dear mortals, when the god king promises the rain will come, and instead the sky stays a mocking, cloudless blue for 10 years? What happens when the people are starving, eating their seed corn just to survive the week, and the king is still demanding they spend their days hauling massive limestone blocks to build him a bigger tomb? That's right, people lose faith. And when people lose faith in their leaders, especially leaders who claim to have a direct line to the divine, things get messy. Imagine your modern-day politicians. If the economy tanks, you vote them out or complain on X, formerly Twitter, for those of you keeping track of your own collapsing digital empires. For the Maya, there was no election cycle. There was only the king's failure. The authority of the kings and priests began to erode. Why build another temple to a rain god who clearly isn't listening? Why pay tribute to a king who can't even provide a decent glass of water? The social contract didn't just expire, it was shredded and set on fire. The divine lineage of the kings was exposed as a sham. The peasants? Oops, I promised not to call you that. The commoners realized that the king's blood was just as red and useless as theirs when it came to making the clouds cry. This led to internal revolts. We see evidence of palaces being burned, of royal monuments being defaced, not by invading armies, but by the city's own inhabitants. It was a crisis of belief that shook the very foundations of their world. Imagine if tomorrow the internet just stopped working, and your government told you the only way to fix it was to dance in the street while they poked themselves with stingray spines. You'd probably start looking for a new government too, wouldn't you? Part 5. The collapse. A whimper, not a roar. So here we are, at the precipice of their great disappearance. But I must correct one of your favorite myths, mortals. It wasn't a sudden cataclysmic event. There wasn't one massive volcanic eruption. No alien invasion. Though I wouldn't put it past those Ancient Aliens shows, with the guy whose hair is trying to escape his head. No. The Maya collapse was more like a slow, agonizing fade. A whisper in the wind, rather than a thunderclap. It's more like a business going bankrupt because it grew too fast and forgot to pay the electric bill. The great cities, one by one, began to empty. Not overnight, but gradually. From about 800 to 1000 CE, the classic heartland, in the southern lowlands, was abandoned. People started moving away from the ceremonial centers, seeking better lands, more reliable water sources, or just a place where a king wasn't constantly asking for blood. The monumental construction ceased. The intricate carvings stopped mid-sentence. In some places, we find unfinished buildings, the tools of the stonemasons left right where they dropped them. It's haunting, isn't it? Like a playground or where the children suddenly vanished, leaving the swings still moving. Imagine your bustling metropolises today. New York, London, Tokyo. Now imagine them slowly, inexorably, becoming ghost towns. Imagine the lights dimming because the power plants have no fuel. Imagine the subway tunnels flooding because there's no one to pump the water out. Imagine the skyscrapers standing silent and forlorn, their glass windows shattered, slowly being reclaimed by weeds and birds. That's what happened to Tikal. It wasn't a single cause, but a perfect storm of disaster. Environmental degradation. Too much corn, not enough trees. Endemic warfare. Everyone fighting over the last taco. Catastrophic drought. The sky forgot how to rain. Loss of faith. The kings turned out to be just guys in fancy hats. And as they left, the jungle, ever patient, ever hungry, began its slow, inexorable march to reclaim what was once its own. Vines snaked around the temples like the tentacles of a green kraken. Trees pushed through stone pavements with the strength of centuries. The sounds of human activity. The markets, the ball games, the chanting of priests were replaced by the chirping of insects, the roar of howler monkeys, and the occasional sigh of a passing dragon. Part 6. The Great Migration and the Survival Myth. Now, don't go thinking the Maya just died out. That's another thing you humans get wrong. Where did they go, you ask, as if they boarded a spaceship. They didn't go anywhere. They just moved. They went north to the Yucatan Peninsula, where cities like Chichen Itza rose to power. They went to the highlands. They became different versions of themselves. But the system, the grand, pyramid-building, king-worshipping, star-mapping system, that was what died. The civilization collapsed, even if the people survived. And that, my dear mortals, is a terrifying distinction. You think your civilization is your buildings and your iPhones. It's not. It's the invisible web of trust and organization that keeps the grocery stores stocked and the lights on. Once that web tears, you're just a bunch of hairless apes wandering around in the ruins of a shopping mall. The Maya who lived after the collapse were probably, in many ways, healthier. They lived in smaller groups. They had more diverse diets. They weren't being forced to build giant tombstones for a guy who claimed to be a sun god. But the glory was gone. The greatness was a memory. You humans love to romanticize the lost civilization. You find it mysterious. But there's no mystery to it. It's the same story that happens over and over again. You overreach. You ignore the warnings of nature. You let your leaders become disconnected from reality. And then you act surprised when the roof falls in. Compare their transition to yours. If your electrical grid failed today, how many of you would know how to grow a single ear of corn? How many of you could find clean water without a plastic bottle? The Maya were survivors. They knew the land. You're dependent on a global supply chain that is essentially held together by hope and cardboard boxes. If your civilization collapsed, it wouldn't be a slow migration to the north. It would be a very chaotic weekend at the local Costco. Part 7. The View from the Canopy. I remember flying over the ruins a few centuries after the last kings left. It was a sight to behold. To you, it looks like a lost world. To me, it looked like a planet finally catching its breath. The pyramids were still there, of course. You humans are very good at stacking rocks, but they were covered in moss and ferns. The great plazas where thousands once gathered to watch sacrifices were now home to jaguars and tapirs. The silence was absolute and quite refreshing, honestly. No one was shouting about the end of the world, because, for them, the world had already ended, and the new one was doing just fine without them. You look at the Maya and see a tragedy. I look at them and see a cautionary tale written in stone. They were brilliant, they were brutal, and they were ultimately unsustainable. They lived in a luxury of jade and feathers that masked a reality of filth and hunger. And here you are, sitting in your climate-controlled boxes, scrolling through your digital tablets, eating food that was grown on the other side of the planet. You have conquered the darkness with LEDs and the heat with Freon. You feel invincible. But remember, the Maya felt the same way when they finished the temple of the giant jaguar. They thought their gods would protect them forever. They thought the corn would always grow. Part 8. Lessons for the short-lived and distracted. So, what have we learned tonight, besides the fact that a dragon's lecture is far more educational than your average history documentary? First, your environment is not an infinite resource. It's not a buffet you can just keep piling your plate from without consequences. The Maya learned this the hard way, and if you're not careful, you might too. Remember those little plastic straws you're so fond of? Multiply that by a few billion, and you start to get the picture. Nature doesn't care about your progress. It only cares about its balance. Second, don't put all your eggs in one basket. The Maya's intense reliance on corn, while efficient for a time, made them incredibly vulnerable. Diversify, innovate, and for the love of all that is sacred, learn to grow something other than just a single crop. Or at least have a backup plan for when the global shipping lanes get clogged. Third, listen to the signs. The Maya had the data. They saw the water levels dropping. They saw the soil turning to dust. But their social and religious systems were too rigid to change. They kept doing the same thing. More sacrifices, more pyramids, expecting a different result. That is the definition of insanity, or as you mortals call it, politics. And finally, dear mortals, remember that no civilization, no matter how grand, how powerful, how advanced, is immune to the passage of time. History is littered with the ruins of those who thought they were the end of history. From the Romans to the Maya, they all fell. The jungle, the desert, or the sea eventually takes it all back. So, Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, take a moment to be grateful. Grateful for your indoor plumbing. Seriously, don't take that for granted. Throwing waste out of a window sounds quaint until you're the one walking under it. Be grateful for your refrigerator, your antibiotics, and your lack of state-mandated head-chopping sports. But also, stay humble. You are but a blip in the eyes of a dragon. Your skyscrapers are just future homes for vines and birds. Your digital legacy is just a bunch of ones and zeros, waiting for a solar flare to turn them into nothingness. Now, if you'll excuse me, all this historical recounting has made me incredibly thirsty. I think I'll go find a nice, cool, unsilted river to, shall we say, hydrate from. Perhaps I'll even find a stray cow for a midnight snack. Don't worry, I'll tip the farmer. Until next time, tiny humans, keep your civilizations hydrated, your environments respected, and your ancient dragons entertained. If you don't, well, I've seen how this story ends, and it's much quieter than you'd like. Farewell, mortals. Sleep well, if you can.